Hello, everyone.
Yeah, good morning.
Morning.
I guess we can get started. I think that we should start with the Daniel's house discussion, since it seems to be the one that will take up the most time. That said, Nick, I'd like to hear your thoughts on where you are with this.
Well, I was going to wait and let everybody else. I want to hear everybody else's thought. You have to start someplace. My thoughts are, I guess I'd outline them like this. Number one, as a matter of policy, I don't favor delisting. I don't like the idea that when circumstances change and for families or whatever, but I don't. The idea that we should delist something because of fashion or whatever is concerning. And secondarily, I'm also aware, though, that there's a house about 10 houses away from this one that y'all may not know. It's not listed, but it was the home of Kenneth Royal, who was the Defense Secretary for Roosevelt during World War II, and it's never been listed, never been noted. 98% of the people in Raleigh don't know or never heard of Kenneth Royal, and but he was a big deal, and is now largely forgotten. Which brings me to the third point: we don't want the significant things in our history to end up being forgotten when we can recognize them, and maybe we ought to be recognizing this one with a landmark sign and not tying up however many acres this year. So I'm skeptical about doing this, and because I think that it is. It's probably not fair to hang him quite so high. Clearly, he had a lot to do with the resurrection of the Democratic Party and the use of race to accomplish that mission, and that's a concern. But I think that if that were it, and he was a newspaper editor, then we would probably have just a marker like we have for Joseph somebody down on Davie Street near McDowell, who was the early founder of the News Observer. And so I'm concerned because we are putting all the focus on our need to move on and change our perspectives about history, but this guy was Secretary of the Navy at a time when the Secretary of the Navy was as powerful, second only to the President, Vice President, and the Secretary of State. The Secretary of the Navy was the man at the time of World War I, and this guy was Navy Secretary for I guess 8 years. But and so I'm skeptical about it. Now, frankly, I would rather find a way to maintain the designation on the house and open the door to development of the most of the raw land that would unlock a whole lot of value for the Masons. But that's not why we're here. We're here about a request to delist it. So I'm skeptical, and I really am wrestling with the rights of a private property owner against the preservation of the landmark once it has been listed, and that's sort of where I sit. So that's enough for me. I'm not even on the committee.
Anyone else?
I'll go. I've been kind of wrestling with this one myself because I feel like either way there are pluses and minuses. Of course, I'm in favor of through this body doing whatever possible to denounce white supremacy and, you know, right the wrongs and not honor, or not right the wrongs, but, you know, not honor these types of people like Daniels. And I'm also concerned that if we don't de-designate, to a lesser extent, I'm concerned that it wouldn't be excellent press for us. I think it could deter people from designating their property, possibly, if they're like, oh, I'm locked in, you know, which of course our job is to preserve. But that's something that has come up for me as well. On the other hand, I agree with you, Nick, that just as a matter of policy, de-designation is not ideal because it takes away from the amount of historically preserved properties that we have. So I don't have a particular leaning one way or the other, but I would like to hear other people's thoughts. I'm open to be swayed.
Well, I of course have something to say. It's probably not what you just said, because I've been up all night. But I've done a ton of reading on this man, and he's despicable. He's horrible. He's whatever adjective you want to use to communicate someone who does not represent the angel in our society. And the fact designated as his suggests to me at some point, and I might have been with racist intent, although I don't go to that place. Sorry. Intent, any behavior, but I'm sure there is. So I feel like if is there a trade-off here? Can we say to the Masons, this property needs to preserve the horror of the history? I mean, to me, it's like saying we're not going to acknowledge the horror of the history if we de-designate it. So could they do something? Could they create a mini museum at their expense if we agree to change the designation? Like, could they say this is, and as a reminder of what we don't believe is right in our society, and then come up with a way for them to go ahead and develop the rest of the land, as you were suggesting, Nick? I mean, I just feel like to de-designate it relinquishes the responsibility of saying, this was wrong and we shouldn't do it again. And you know, those traditional kinds of poignant memories are places where the people who created them or lived or were housed or did the behavior. So I'm really hoping that we can find a way to do both. And that's why I suggested we do a little side meeting about it. Maybe that's what this is, but I get your historic designation is about property and development and demolishing and stuff. And I respect that they want money for the land. So if we let them get money for the land, can they create something that doesn't let the memory of this man's horror go away? And it seems to me that's a perfect place for it. So that's all I got to say. And sorry if I'm not eloquent, because I am a little tired.
I second that. I'm also very tired.
Slow, yeah, it's a little bit slow getting off the deck this morning. Tanya, am I right that this is it's a landmark, but like somebody can give a 365-day notice and bulldoze the house?
No, not this one. This one is has one of the 2 properties in Raleigh and one of the only 11 in the state that has statewide significance. So y'all actually have the authority to deny demolition.
Okay.
And it's a National Historic Landmark, which is not a local designation, but.
Right. But we know that that doesn't have. That's much more about honoring a place than it is about doing much to preserve it.
So if we delist it as a Raleigh Historic Landmark, what happens to those other designations?
The National Register or the National Historic Landmark designation does not go away. Those stay the same. The only thing that does change is it no longer has, statewide significance, because that is, at least from that standpoint, because that is tied directly to landmark designation. So it simply becomes no longer locally designated. Everything else stays the same.
So if we delist it, they can tear it down. If we don't delist it, they can't.
Correct. They would have to file a COA,
right?
And then the COA committee would have the, decision whether or not to approve the demolition.
Excuse me, go ahead, Tanya.
I was just going to add that the designation, the way it's written, is that it's the significance is the person, but it's the house and the land that are considered contributing, and that the addition of the Masonic temple is not considered contributing. So right now, if they were to file a COA to demolish that part, that potentially would get approved. Of course, also, if someone were to come right now and ask for, designation of its, whole, I think it has as much significance, if not more, as, the Masonic temple, but that's not what they're asking for.
Right. Because that auditorium's been there a long time in and of itself.
Right. 55, I think, is when it was built.
Yeah, it's been all the time I've lived in Raleigh, which is 50 years. But so yeah, it theoretically could have secondary significance, which would only matter with respect to trying to get tax credits or something that is of no value to the Masons here. So we need. My thought is, I think the city is going to do it, and so I maybe a way to think through this. If you make that assumption that probably the city is going to do it, that part of what we're doing, and I don't mean there's a cop out as if that takes the responsibility off of us, but I think that part of this is positioning us as to how we approach these issues and what positions we ought to take. But my perception is that that it's likely the council will support it as being, with the size of that parcel of land and the potential tax value and tax base and all of that that they're really being burdened to a significant degree with tying up the entire tract. But I will remember the discussion that part of what made it significant was the scope of the parcel, so much larger and significant than anything in Hayes Barton or whatever else. And that's part of what stressed the accomplishment. And of course, in that sense, the guy's building a monument to himself at the time he did it, or the family is. Because at the time this got built, wasn't it like 1924 or something? And he's already through being Secretary of the Navy and those things at that point. And a quarter century later than the events of leading to the segregation and Jim Crow laws and the Wilmington riots and the rest of that. But yeah, all of that is despicable, and a big part of what we're getting out of this now is it is a tool to teach us what we never knew growing up that had gone on by prior generations in our own state. And so that leads back to Susan's point. Maybe there's a different or better way to commemorate how horrific the politics were that did those things in the name of restoring power to the establishment at the time. So let's see, procedurally now, Tanya, the way we did it at the last meeting was it went on, it moved forward to council, but was going to come back to us. And so it's not like this committee needs to act today, but whatever act it gives, it probably needs to go back to the full body anyway. And so will the request after the council first hears about it.
Right. So y'all voted to move it forward in the process, to go to city council, and it, I've put in, and barring something weird, it will be on the November 17th city council under consent agenda, asking to schedule a public hearing, which will probably be January 5th, the joint public hearing, and also to send it to the State Historic Preservation Office. And so we will get comments, presumably back from them. And then after the joint public hearing, council will close that and send it back to RHDC, at which point y'all will need to, proffer a recommendation at that point, because that's your role. And then it'll go back finally one last time to city council, and they will, vote to approve or not approve the request for de-designation. And then a new ordinance that rescinds the old ordinance will go into place. I'm wondering if, we do want to try to have another special, meeting to discuss it, just to have the opportunity to have, anyone on the commission that wants just to have sort of a smaller discussion about it. I'm particularly, our commissioners of color, because we've got 3 right now, and I know, unfortunately, Rashay wasn't able to be here today, but she had some, very eloquent thoughts. I just, from my standpoint as staff, because of the, race and equity issues, I want to make sure that the discussion that's had is as broad as possible, so that when you do whatever recommendation you make, it's clearly been, made with a lot of thought, and everybody's had a chance. And staff, we can look at, what we know that's out there and what we're learning that's out there in, professional preservation land about, dealing with, ugly history, preserving, from that standpoint, and just see what if there's out there, if there's any guidance that we can provide sort of as y'all move forward as a commission, because it's not an issue that's going to go away.
Kind of that's, but I feel like, and again, I'm new to the committee, but I feel like it's very black or white. And I love your suggestion about getting other options. I mean, I don't know if mine is viable or not, but what if we come up with another option to the Masons? Don't they feel like this is, they either have to delist it so they can build, so they can get some money, or they have to keep fighting for delisting, or we have to keep it listed? I mean, it's just black or white. I'm looking for some way that we can accomplish what this committee and your broader commission feel is the right thing to do, with some alternative suggestions, because it feels like within the guidelines that we live within, we've ignored them. So let's either say, okay, there's nothing we can do, or let's come up with it's like this insanity. If you always do it the way you've always done it, you're always going to get what you always got. And I'm new, but I think that history here needs to figure out a way to manage this process. And I guess that's all I have to say. Sorry.
Tanya, would this special meeting be separate from a business meeting or anything like that?
I mean, that's my suggestion. I don't think it has to be, but
I think it's a good idea. Would it be possible to invite representative from the property?
I mean, sure. I mean, yeah, I mean, it would be Mr. Murray who, he's been hired as officially their representative, and he could. I'm not sure what he's going to say beyond, what he put in the letter that was received, because he did address a lot of these comments.
If we're talking about trying to work with him for a solution that, satisfies both parties, then he should probably be there.
I mean, if that's what the discussion is going to be, I was thinking of it more as just sort of a discussion. I mean, and y'all can, I mean, it's your meeting, you can however, but my thought was just, just sort of an open conversation about the fact that the designation is for this person who, was a white supremacist, and sort of from that perspective.
Right.
And
I think that Tanya is right, that we want part of this is to try to assure broad participation of all the commission, and be sure we've got all of those thoughts and ideas, and that everybody feels comfortable that we've arrived at a consensus and the like. And if we need another meeting to do that with more time, then I'll be fine to try and make sure that happens. And I certainly don't mind hearing. I don't think that at such a meeting is the time to try to horse trade a deal or alternatives with the property owner, but that would probably need to be a work group or somebody who could reach out to them and have that discussion about our concerns. And I agree with Tanya that Mr. Murray's put his thoughts in here, and I thought it was a pretty good piece and pretty good bit of work on his part, putting this presentation together. And we knew a lot of that, but we picked up some tidbits that we didn't already know, and so that was good. But we could try and if we were going to try to have that kind of a discussion, particularly if it was going to lead to possible development of alternatives, that would then be somehow proffered by the property owner as a commitment in the process of gaining approval for the delisting. That kind of a meeting that would lead to those kinds of discussions probably needs to be, I guess I'd say before Christmas, but yeah, I'm just thinking about process and thinking about how to move this, and I'm interested in what all y'all think. And it might be that quite apart from any of that the truth is, if we had an up or down vote, the majority of the commission would just vote to delist it and move on. Because the house is not what is particularly significant. It's not the architecture of the house, although it's a fine place. And his accomplishments, and then we could certainly compare and contrast his accomplishments with others that we haven't recognized at all.
Yeah, I think having a broader meeting about this would be good. I do, in the end, I would be in favor of getting kind of negotiating with the property owner more if we're going to come up with some type of modified arrangement. But I think for the purposes of if we had a special meeting for this with the commission, it would be great to maybe use this as an opportunity for a bigger conversation to kind of how are we going to deal with these things going forward. I think it's unlikely that this is the last situation of this type that we're going to encounter, especially as more and more things are uncovered, or people come forward or things like that. So I think this could be a good opportunity for us to just discuss how do we want to handle these things, what are what's our operating procedure for this? And in that vein, probably a little late in the conversation to be asking this, but as far as de-designation is concerned, is there any guidance for what would be an appropriate de-designation, or is it just discretionary on our part?
It's discretionary, and frankly, for de-designation and, you know, designation. So the criteria for designation is just simply that it must have special significance in terms of, you know, architecture, history, culture, architecture. I already said that. And then the commission, you know, has discretion in that. When it comes to de-designation, the only thing that is actually in the code is that you have the authority to recommend de-designation, you know, for cause, not that there is cause. So it's really, I'm sorry, that's a long way to say it's your discretion. The last one that came through, the Weber House, the commission, you know, recommended keeping designation because nothing had changed. You know, it still had its significance, but it also didn't have the same sort of, it did not have the same sort of history around it as this one. So there was not any disadvantage to the commission to do so. And so this, you know, whether you recommend de-designation or not, I think has less to do about the building and more to do about the, you know, how the commission is going to, you know, treat this history.
To Katie's point, thinking about the process, I don't know how many more things like this there are going to be in Raleigh, but I also think we need to remember that we are sort of a role model for the whole state, particularly everything from Greensboro to the coast. And so that how we go about trying to address these things may end up being, however we solve this may be something that will end up becoming important in as an example of how to proceed, whether we're talking about Kinston or Newbern or Edenton or wherever, or Wilmington. So I'm advertent to our role as the heirs of the best local historic commission around. So what do y'all think about proceeding like this then? That we will try to have staff look at the overall timeline, slot a special meeting where the issue is this, but and more broadly addressing our race, our history on race, and how to approach that, and then so that we have done that. And if we come out of that with the decision that we want to try to have a side discussion with the property owners about alternative recognition, there's still time to do that before it ends up going through public hearing and back to this body for a final decision.
That sounds good, Nick.
Yeah, I'm in favor of that.
Okay. Susan says that'd be fine if we could just end the meeting so she could go to bed.
I have meetings all day, so you don't feel bad. I'll be asleep by the 3 o'clock meeting. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I think the comments that we've had have been really good. I thought Shay's comments the other day were really good. I thought it was an interesting slant that what's the name had on thinking of this as on the backs of whom was the place built, although that's not quite the same as what we would say about Mount Vernon or Monticello or something, because it was, you know, yes, I'm sure they're African-American laborers. They may have been oppressed. They weren't slaves technically. But anyway, that was another interesting way to think through what this property represents. So I don't know what else we'll get out of it, but I think it's good that we keep moving while we are trying to be sure that we have raked through this for every good idea we can find.
All right, well, I will put forward then a doodle poll with some possible dates and get that out there. And also, I think this will be like the first. I mean, I think this discussion on race and equity will only continue, and how we treat it. But this will be a good start.
And to clarify, is this a voluntary meeting, an optional meeting for commissioners who choose to participate in the conversation, or a separate full commission meeting?
It'll be I mean, the meetings are, I mean, it's not a standing meeting. So any meetings that are outside of the standing committees in May 1 are always voluntary. So this would just be a special meeting for those who wish to discuss this matter. But, on the chance that we have a, quorum of commissioners, we'll advertise it, public, notice it to the public as we do all of our other meetings.
But so to follow up on that, then I hadn't thought about that idea, but could the committee act if it is not a special meeting? If we wanted to make a decision or take a vote or whatever, does it matter?
I mean, I think the only way I mean, typically in the committees, I mean, if it's the actual, just if it were just the research committee talking, then they could, take a vote on a recommendation to take to the full commission. I think that unless you unless at a business meeting you designated, an ad hoc committee and made it a thing, I don't know that you would be voting to come back with a recommendation to the full commission.
Yeah, well, we'll find a way to work through the procedure. I don't think we need to get too hung up with it, y'all. If we got there and we were prepared to do something and we decided we're going to just let the people who are actual members of the research committee vote on that matter, and they just do it on behalf of everybody, and we'll move on. It's troubling, folks, that Nicole and Colette are eating breakfast while I'm sitting here salivating. Anyhow, so is that enough of that, Ian? You want to move on to whatever else is on your agenda?
Yeah, we can stop there. So, Nick, did you want to talk about your idea, the FHA houses?
Yeah. So I had sent Ian an email or a comment that we ought to be looking at how to commemorate or find appropriate objects to list of the crackerbox houses that were built in the aftermath of World War II and in the early 1950s. Now, back up one step. Remember that I hold the overall view that we ought to be reaching out farther from downtown, looking for significant things and finding ways to list them, because we risk having history frozen in time that nothing after 1900 is worth keeping. And so, but it seemed to me, actually in getting ready for this meeting and a couple of things yesterday, I sent an email to my older brothers. We were talking about, I sent an email to them pointing out a street, down the street, half a dozen blocks from where me and my brothers grew up. There was a whole neighborhood of these houses, and guys came back from World War II, we had the GI Bill, we had these FHA VA loans, and it was on the backs of those two tools that bunches of families were able to get a home, say 1,200 square feet. The floor plans weren't much bigger than our Lustron, but they were all these, a lot of them has asbestos siding, but they were all these square boxes. And ultimately FHA and VA had standard plans. And that's one reason there's a neighborhood like that in pretty much every town. But it commemorates the greatest generation and how we were able to move forward as a society. And those houses are rapidly disappearing. And so one of the neighborhoods, there are more than one neighborhood, but and Ian brought up that one of the things that we ought to do in the process is to point out how, again, in our efforts to deal with race, African-American folks in Raleigh never got the benefits, as far as I know, of the GI Bill or these government-backed loans, and were never, and as a result, their family was held back for a couple of generations in terms of trying to generate equity within a family that would allow them to move into the middle class the way so many of the greatest generation were able to do. So if you go down Whitaker Mill, if you're at 5 Points and you go down Whitaker Mill and you pass the old county home there, where the city has a senior center, and you go to the right or the left, particularly the right into the Georgetown neighborhood, you will find that those houses are rapidly disappearing, and they're probably in Georgetown now, I dare say there are no more than 10 surviving that have not been totally morphed into something else and are no longer recognizable. And so I said to Ian, I wonder if we could create a flyer or mail it or whatever, and be in touch with all of those property owners that have one of those, and seek and urge them to tell them we would like to designate their property, as a result of which they would get half price on their real estate taxes, and try to get a few of these designated and get some control over additions and modifications and tear downs before the last ones are gone. And so that could happen in Georgetown, like I talked about, and there are probably more down behind that little shopping center that has a restaurant and a few things on, also on Whitaker Mill on the north side of the road, back down in there, near Mayview, convalescent home and the like. And so, and there may be others that don't jump and that don't pop into my head. Now, after we did those kinds of houses in the late 40s and early 50s, then we moved to the ranch houses, like there are all back of Ridgewood Shopping Center and other neighborhoods we can find. And so there are these, each decade has its own characteristic style of architecture. But I'm particularly keen on these early ones because of their connection to the FHA, VA, the GI Bill, and how we built society with those tools. And so that was the idea, and I just threw the ball to you guys to think about: is it got merit? What could we do? And of course, I always think, like this Daniels thing, we're pretty quick to recognize great big houses, and we don't do nearly as well recognizing little tiny houses. So that's my idea.
I was just going to mention one thing that popped in my head is that whether it's at the business meeting or at the next research committee, staff could pull together a brief little what is already in the National Register just sort of as a place to start, because I think probably most of the commissioners here, haven't been around since we, designated some of the neighborhoods as National Register. And just to give you an idea of what we already know, which would be the place to start for what you're talking about, Nick. Like, High Mount is a National Register historic district, but of course that doesn't have any protection on it, so we would be looking at individual designations, because many of those, like Georgetown Road, even before now, was looked at and not determined to have a district even early on. Capitol Heights. I don't feel like I'm saying that. The little, I'm misremembering the name of the neighborhood, I think, but there's another National Register historic district. Of course, that one's downtown, that has the smaller houses. But anyway, the point being, just sort of a quick and dirty, here are the 28 National Register districts that we know about. They are this era, this size, they're African American or not, because we do have a handful now, to sort of some brief things, just as an overview, FYI. This is what we know, if you're interested.
Yeah, I like the idea of kind of opening up the conversation about what some different landmark types could be. I think right now, yeah, it's very centralized in the downtown area. Are these homes that have a certain look or a certain story behind them? And I think that generation as well, we haven't maybe put as much emphasis on. So I think I like the idea of that neighborhood. It also brings to mind, I'm really not sure if there's any, under what context these homes were built, but makes me think of the neighborhood on Navajo Drive, behind like Holly Park area as well. I know that neighborhood is very well intact, and all of those homes were built in the late 50s. Not sure if that's related, but could be a similar area that we might want to look at as well.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Back behind the Wake Tech campus that is on the Beltline, north of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like just outside the Beltline, like Apache Drive and that kind of area. I can't remember what that neighborhood is called, but most of the homes there are totally original. You kind of drive through and there's not a lot of new development or anything, so, which is atypical, I think, for that area of the city.
So Ian,
I would love to hear what you put together, Tanya, what the committee is or together with staff has, because it will help me as I drive around to understand this is already done, this isn't done, and then we can build from there. Because there's a bunch of neighborhoods I've found that are, I think, worth thinking about as a historic, is the history of Raleigh. So I'd love to see what you've already done, if that's possible. Thank you.
Ian, would you want that to come back to research committee, or do you think that this is something that you would want us to share with the whole commission, Nick?
I think it probably needs to come back to research and then have, if it comes to the full body, I think it needs to come with sort of an approach and a plan, and as to how to get at it. In this case, it also has the feature of being proactive and reaching out, trying to get people to designate rather than waiting for folks to bring it. And it would be interesting to look back. Tanya, did I recall also, and this is changing gears, but I recall that we had discussion about designating the old Raleigh bonded warehouse on Capitol Boulevard.
It did. It's a landmark.
Okay.
It got listed.
Yeah. So there have been, to Susan's point, a little bit of the history of what got designated and what not. Maybe we need to back up and think about those things. Raleigh Bonded Warehouse was significant for being first a multimodal transportation hub where rail came in at the back and tractor trailers at the front, and it was significant for how commerce changed and developed. And so we have a number of properties that represented something about how healthcare developed, how multifamily housing developed, how we dealt with affordable housing, what we did for industry. And of course, these people come to us because they want to try to set it up and get the tax credits for a rehab. And of course, you leave a Raleigh bonded warehouse, obviously they never move forward in a rehab effort, but they've got the tool available to them. So yeah, I think it should come back to committee.
So ideally, we would be looking for houses that were, or one house that was that had a lot of historic fabric left.
Yeah, we'd be trying to locate the handful. If we could find 10 that were intact, largely unaltered, at least from the exterior.
Yeah.
We would. The idea would be to reach out to all 10 of them and see if we could get 1 or 2 that wanted to be listed.
Okay.
I don't know whether that's the best idea or not, but it is an approach, because those neighborhoods, there, as Tanya said, they're too much of the original fabric. There's too much of it has changed. It's no longer possible to create a historic district with it, at least not that way. They've been changed and bought at a furious rate in the last 10 years.
I worry we might run into some problems with the fact that these neighborhoods specifically excluded Black people. But I think it's also a good opportunity to tell that story.
Yeah.
I guess you could look at it both ways.
It may have been, I think it may well be that those houses will have that covenant on them. I think that the covenants were outlawed. You know, my first house was built in 1954. I don't think it had that covenant on it. But mine was sort of that later generation of the early ranch houses and not one of these. So yeah, the covenants were being used up in the 40s, I'm sure, until the U.S. Supreme Court invalidated them in sometime in the early 50s, I think.
I think it was the early 50s. My neighborhood didn't have them. I looked into it after you brought it up, and my neighborhood did not have them, despite the fact that it was. I looked in city directories. It was completely white. There was not one single Black person in the neighborhood. So that had been set in stone at that point.
Right. All right. Well, what else you got on your agenda?
Let's see. I guess we can move on with the McAdams and Hillcrest comments. The documents that you sent me, or sent everyone, Tanya, were different than what you sent me a few weeks ago.
Well, yes and no. So the way so to back up a little bit, just as a reminder, for as we move properties through the local historic landmark designation process, you refer the applications and reports to the State Historic Preservation Office. They have 30 days to provide comment, and the way they functionally do that is they send an official letter, and that's what got uploaded and shared with everybody. But they also provide in an email form some specific, sometimes some more specific guidance that is, perhaps a little more critical. They keep that out of the formal letter. Okay. And so that's what I had forwarded to you. They had questions on both both of the properties with the McAdams house. Well, one of their issues with the McAdams house was not the report's problem. It was how I pulled together the information and compiled it. So sort of as background for some of y'all, we had a private property owner come forward wanting designation for the McAdams house. It was designed by Leif Valland. When he came forward, we had no context or any information about, this architect. And it just so happened that a private consultant, Hanbury Preservation Incorporated, was already doing some research on him. And so, we hired her to prepare a context report on Leif Valland, which is complete but awaiting formal acceptance by this body, the research committee, and then RHDC. But we asked her also to specifically write a blurb to go with the McAdams house designation report. And the way I compiled it was confusing. So that was some of their issues. They're like, it looks like it was plagiarized from someone, and it was simply the way I put it together. Their biggest question had to do with the integrity of the building, which I know y'all discussed. The
carport.
The carport, yeah, primarily. And so, tonight's the joint public hearing, of course, and then it'll come back to y'all for your final recommendation at the, I guess, the November 17th business meeting. So I don't know if you wanted to discuss that again, the integrity. And then for the Hillcrest Cemetery, I think the questions were, sorry, just rereading this again. So it looks like the main question had to do with, so the Hillcrest Cemetery is significant as an African-American cemetery, but also the fact that it is a cemetery that was created by, a for-profit entity, by funeral homes, as opposed to being, created by a neighborhood or a church or municipally owned. And in the email, they had some questions about, if we're talking about partial significance from the Lightners, is this really the best example? So I just wanted y'all to have the opportunity to look at their comments and discuss and make sure that you still agree with your recommendation from before. The as their comments say in both cases, the local designation reports don't have the same strict requirements that National Register designations do, but they want to make sure that they are clear and have what you need to make a decision, and ultimately City Council to make a decision.
Going back to the McAdams house, I think their main concern was the integrity, and the integrity centering around the carport. That was their main issue. And in my opinion, I think it's the positives of that house outweigh the integrity of the carport, namely the fact that we have all of the building plans for that house. And it's a really good all-round example of Valland's style. That it would be a shame if the carport prevented that property from being listed, and that alone, especially when it was done I think it was doing well. Anybody else have any opinions on that?
I agree with you on that. And I don't think that the carport, if it were a more key element to why we were designating it or why it would have been significant, I think that would be a more substantial conversation. But I agree with you. The amount of documentation there is about the home, I think far outweighs the change to the carport.
I also agree.
Okay, thanks. I remember that they wanted more information on the Lightners. Is that right, Tanya? Or they? What did?
Yeah, the email said, well, what they said is with a more thorough look at other Lightner related sites, we believe the report will provide, sufficient information to determine whether it has the special significance and integrity for local landmark designation. So yeah, they were looking for more information on that. That's not what we asked the consultant to do necessarily. That was not the focus when we went, forward. So as background for some of you newly, Hillcrest Cemetery, it was the Friends of Hillcrest Cemetery that came forward, interested in designation, and that this was a designation report that the commission y'all chose to use your funds for. So, we hired architectural historian who specializes in cemetery designations who did the report. I did forward this to the consultant, and I just realized he did not. He said he was going to look at it, and then I haven't heard back from him. So if there was a tweak we wanted to make to the report, if it's little, he could do that. Anything else, we would need to, give them more money to do future research.
So what do you think we should do? Sort of surprised they have an issue with it.
Me too. I think that the only thing we could keep that as the significance, and you could, suggest that future, acknowledge that there may be other, properties associated with it. The other piece is the report could be changed slightly to, reduce the significance as being specifically related to the Lightners and just be, more generically, created by funeral homes, and that just happened to be the Lightners. I don't know, that's certainly a possibility.
That's always sort of the way I viewed it. I don't know.
Yeah. So, again, the comments from the State Historic Preservation Office are to give the commission something to think about, and you can decide whether you agree with them. You could, like you just did with the McAdams house, you can say, good points, we disagree, we still think it has the significance, and you can move on. You can do that too. I also think, I know the report, even if the report added it, I think this issue, let me back up. When it comes to local designation, you absolutely want a report to, show that it has a special significance, but you are also balancing it with finding property owners who are interested in local designation. So what gets locally designated, may not be, the 100% best example of, this particular thing. It can be one of several that have significance, but really you rely on property owner interest. And for example, the Lightner Funeral Home building would be great, but in prior talks, there has not been owner interest in designating that. So it is a balance. So it is here. I just wanted y'all to have the opportunity to talk about it. If there's something you think the consultant should change in the report, then we can. You can also just say, thank you, state, and move along.
I think it might be good to maybe tweak it a little bit to make it sound more like I imagined it sounding.
Okay.
And go with it. That's my recommendation.
Everybody else agree?
That's fine with me. I don't have any major opinion on this one.
I'm
And just as an FYI, note for tonight's hearing, there will be nobody speaking other than me giving the brief presentation. The one person, so Ruby Powell, who is the representative from the Friends of Hillcrest Cemetery, there was a technical issue and her sign up didn't go through, but she sent an email, which I was going to forward to y'all, and I will after the meeting. She sent an email to City Council, and I said I'd share it with the commission, just reiterating, why she believes it's significant and hoping it moves forward. But because of a technical issue, the joint public hearing will definitely be short because nobody has signed up to actually say words.
Okay. Can we move on? Is that it, Tanya, for that? Okay. Can you explain a little bit more about this archaeological survey?
Yes.
I'm unclear about what we should do at this point, what we need to do.
Right. Well, this is very different. So the archaeological report was created as a result of a rezoning. So there was a rezoning case, I think 2014, for 3 properties along East Lenore Street in the Prince Hall Historic Overlay District. The rezoning request was to remove overlay district designation from the 3 properties. It includes the Journal Baptist Convention Center building, and then 2 houses. So that rezoning got approved. So those 3 lots were taken out of the Prince Hall Historic Overlay District. And one of the conditions was that the owners attempt to have the houses relocated. That did happen. Those 2 houses are now back in the overlay district on South Bloodworth Street. The other condition was that an archaeological survey be completed. And the property owners hired, I've now forgotten the name of the entity, it starts with a G, to create this, this document. What was created, it was an archaeological assessment as opposed. So the question I have for this body, and the rezoning condition did say that they would work with RHDC. So the question I have for you all is, do you believe that this archaeological assessment meets the goal of the rezoning condition of having an archaeological survey done? Or do you think that that a step recommended in this archaeological assessment needs to happen to actually meet that condition, because the owner and developers are waiting to check that box before they can actually build their hotel.
Tanya, can I jump in?
Yes, please, Caleb.
That's a rare case of I actually know what we're talking about here, being an archaeologist. So I did read the report. I think it's Richard Grubb and Associates. And the report is solid itself. I mean, it's a professional job. It, unfortunately, or maybe all it was intended to do was to say, this is the first step in a 2-step or maybe 3-step process. And it's more of a reconnaissance, being they went and looked at it and said, there could be something there. We recommend we look a step further with, in this case, a ground penetrating radar survey. That's a pretty sound recommendation. It's kind of a nice intermediate step. It wouldn't be incredibly expensive for the property owners. And what they'll be looking for is evidence of structural features like outhouses, trash pits, other things like that that may have been behind these homes. Now, the homes are all completely removed, and the lots, I believe, are just maybe gravel parking lots. But the GPR machine can see under the ground and will be able to identify stuff. So, I mean, they would say they do the GPR and they see some what we call anomalies, which is the little shaded areas that show that there's something under the ground. They would then need a next step, which is to hand excavation to see what it is, and then to also see if they were indeed associated with the houses that had been there. And also they would have to evaluate whether what they found was eligible for the National Register. So this report was just an initial sort of reconnaissance, and but it's certainly technically sound and makes a lot of sense. That's all I got.
So in your opinion, do you think that we should require the GPR of the sites?
If you want to know what's there, because there's no other way to do it.
Yeah.
I would say there's a pretty low chance that there's anything significant there. That's usually the case.
I would agree.
But they make a good case that it's worth looking. And like I said, from a developer standpoint, it is a fairly inexpensive option. Archaeology in general is a pretty inexpensive option. So I always say go for it. Once this wheel starts and someone is required to identify and evaluate an archaeological resource, once it's started, you kind of need to, you can't just say, well, let's just stop. I mean, you sort of have to go to the point of, you have to be able to say, there is something there and we evaluated it and it either needs more work or it doesn't.
That thought occurred to me too while I was reading it. I thought, well, you've gone to all this trouble. Why not just scan it and see what's there, if there's anything there?
And it doesn't matter in this case so much for us, but GPR is not the only way to do this, but it is the quickest. And you could scrape it with a big piece of equipment, scrape the surface dirt off and kind of see what was below. That's how we used to do it. But if this company, Richard Grubb and Associates, has access to a GPR, which they probably do, and they're able to do that, it would be a pretty inexpensive way. And at least they'd be able to say, there's something underneath the ground there in the back of where the houses used to be, or we didn't see anything and you can stop. But the idea is...
I wanted to ask a couple questions.
Okay.
Okay. So I read the report, but can you explain to me what precipitated this need for this report on these 2 lots after the houses were already removed and the lot was scraped and whatever was done to it to create a parking lot? And what do you do if you do find evidence of an outhouse? How is that, like, I mean, I assume that any old house had an outhouse behind it. So how is finding evidence of an outhouse or evidence of a trash pit significant? And then what does that trigger for the developer or the builder on this piece of property? I've read the report, it makes sense, but I don't understand the beginning and the end.
Well, that's why I said, once you've started this, you kind of have to take it to its end, or at least somewhere near the end. What we searched for in this case, I believe these houses, if I remember from the report, were maybe late 1800s, 1890s, 1900. So the goal would be for archaeologists to see whether there's any remains, in this case in the backyard of where the houses had been, outhouses. We called them privies, or trash pits or something else, where we would be able to find where they had dumped their trash. Because outhouses generally were filled with trash, as were trash pits out back or any other indention. And if we could find intact deposits of trash from the 1890s, theoretically we'd be able to possibly learn something more about living in the 1890s. So that would be, you're trying to determine, does that condition exist or not? If it does, and if you can make an argument that this is a good example of an 1890s house, place to learn more about life back then through the trash that we'd find, then it would become, okay, we got to do more. So that's what we're looking for. We're trying to find out, is the condition there to where maybe we could learn more about life in that time. And I believe these houses were occupied by African Americans, so we would kind of throw that in as an added research topic of, hey, this might be an example of, we could learn more about the African American experience in Raleigh in the 1890s based on the trash. But we have to see that the trash is there, because a lot of times it's not. Like you said, Nicole, the site has been messed with, as most of them are. And so it's somewhat rare that we would find a good situation, but it does happen. So what they're doing is just trying to look to see if that situation exists, but they have to do the GPR and then maybe even some hand excavation to get there. So once you start it, you can't just say, yeah, there could be something there. I mean, you gotta go to the end point.
Or else why bother to do it to start with? You might find it was a smokehouse or a blacksmith operation. Could be because they may have been working out of the back of the house with whatever trade. And of course you might find dark spots that indicate the existence of a hog house or something else back there where livestock was being kept, even though maybe they weren't supposed to in town, but they may have been. And so and I'm sure the owners are trying to check this off and hope and keeping their fingers crossed that nothing gets found that's a big deal.
Well, I like to say that
that's required. Was this first step required for them to?
That's what the zoning did.
Because of the area that it's in?
Yeah.
There was a condition of the rezoning to go do it.
Because of the location?
Yeah.
Because it was rezoned in return for them being able to rezone the property. Tanya, I'm not sure who required the archaeological survey. Is it like the?
So the way so for rezonings, conditions are offered by the property owner. Now the property owner, may have. Well, I know they talked with representatives of our HDC. They talked with Preservation North Carolina. They talked to a lot of people. So I think the offer of moving the house, the houses, the offer of the archaeological survey, to become a condition was they put in to help them move forward more quickly in getting approval for the rezoning request. So, but legally and ultimately, it was the property owner that said, said we will do this, and then it got codified, and now they actually have to do what they said they were going to do. Or if they sold it, the new property owner would have to do what the rezoning said that they had to do.
So we need to make a decision on whether they should move forward and go ahead and finish.
Yes. So you as research committee, if I could get a thumbs up or a thumbs down that you want them to do the next step before you will sign off, on having met that zoning condition. We have our staff has our opinion, but the rezoning specifically condition says that they will work with RHDC, and that is your role as the research committee.
Well, if the requirement was for an archaeological survey and any additional stuff, it has not been achieved yet. This document is not an archaeological survey. It's saying simply there might be something there. We should do an archaeological survey, in this case with a GPR.
I agree with Caleb. I precedents here, and it's important to say we're going to follow through on what we said we're going to do. So I'm support your going forward.
Normally, this would not be the context where archaeological surveys would be done. I appreciate that it is. Normally, our work is done because we get permits or from the federal government, or we get funding from the federal government. That's often when an archaeological survey, at least in my line of work, that's what causes it. But I don't know, this is pretty cool. I say there's a low chance that anything cool is going to be found, but it's worth a shot. If that was part of the rezoning, they should do it. I mean, I wouldn't say all of us should survey our backyards in Oakwood, but in 1 in 10 backyards, we might find something pretty cool. But often we find the same thing over and over and over, and at that point, you stop and you're like, okay, this isn't special. This is the same as we found hundreds of times.
And there's not been urban, much. I mean, very, very, very little urban archaeology done in Raleigh, and not any, well, other than the Fha House site that RHDC paid for, there's not been any in an African American community that I'm aware of in Raleigh.
Well, if it's up to me, I'd say we could do it in a lot of rezoning cases because, hey, we're cheap. I mean, that's the way it is. Archaeologists, we don't get paid much, so you can do this work and it's not going to drive anybody bankrupt. So I'd say it's a good feel-good thing, and often we can learn something. But so in this case, the rezoning calls for it. It has not been completed. So take it to the next step or two, definitely.
I agree.
Likewise.
Thank you. I will share that with the consultant and the property owner.
Next is the valid report. So we need to decide whether it looks good, or because I noticed, I mean, it's got a lot of grammatical errors in it and typos. I'm assuming that's not what you're looking for.
It is not, but I can send it back and ask her to fix those. The report got finished right about time as COVID hit, and we weren't bringing it, so I went ahead and did a cursory look and finalized the contract with the consultant. But if I send it back and said, hey, will you fix these, then she will. But if you want them fixed before we take it to the full commission for accepting. But so it's yes, that, but also, did it do what do you feel like it covered things well?
I think it's a great report. Yeah. Did everybody else have a chance to read it? or at
Yeah,
least parts of
I
it.
think it looks good also.
Yeah, let's
Okay.
send it on. Looks good.
Okay, all right. Well, it looks like people are dropping off because it's after 9. I can't remember, was there anything else, Ian?
I think that's it.
All right, well, I will have her look at the, or staff will look at, typogrammatical things and see if we can get that on the research committee, the business meeting agenda for this month.
Sounds great. Okay, well, I guess that's it. Thank you, everybody.
Awesome.
Thank
Good day.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.